without further ado, I am going to rustle up our Congressman Auchincloss. No, we are going to take 20 seconds before that happens. Right, former Representative Kay Kahn is here as well. Okay, here we have a congressman. Welcome everybody, and here's Congressman Auchincloss.
Good evening. Thank you for spending your time with me. And I want to welcome in particular and thank you for attending our Mayor, Ruth Ann Fuller, our City Council President, Mark Laredo, our State Representatives, Greg Schwartz and Amy Sangiolo. I believe State Senator Cindy Cream has business at the State House, but I know she sends her regards and wishes that she could be here, and also our city councilors as well. So thank you all for attending. There's certainly no shortage of current events to engage us this evening, and I look forward to your questions about them. I want to start the conversation by conveying, amidst all of this heat and noise, the three principles that are guiding me as your voice and vote in these trying and turbulent times. First, the support and defense of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights against the authoritarian overreach of this president. The vital elements of this defense include the power of the purse for Congress, the independence of the judiciary, and the apolitical posture of the military. These constitutional bulwarks are all under severe strain. For example, the administration has illegally frozen funds appropriated by Congress, including $6 billion for education funding that was, though, recently released. It is accused of defying or frustrating court oversight in 57 cases, about a third of all litigation it faces. And it deployed the United States Marines to Los Angeles in a purely political stunt that has undermined esprit de corps in the United States Marine Corps. The Republican majority in Congress, with whom I serve, is a rubber stamp. They're not interested in policy debate. They're interested purely in being courtiers to a king. And the Supreme Court has proven to be in awe of presidential power. And this places a unique responsibility upon the Democratic Party to both oppose Republicans on policy, to be on the field of policy debate going back and forth, but also to have to referee the scrum in support of the rule of law. And that's incredibly challenging. And you would be forgiven for doubting whether Democrats can do it. I'll be blunt. The party is exhausted, and it shows. And my second principle is, therefore, that the Democrats got to get some game. Over the last 6 months, through both traditional and new channels, I've put forward dozens of big ideas to help animate our ability to win and, more importantly, to govern. Treating cost disease in housing and healthcare, which account for half of a middle-class family's budget, through a combination of cutting red tape, adopting technology, and reining in corporate middlemen. Ensuring retirement security through reforms to Social Security, personal savings, and defined benefits. Adopting a fresh start tax code to reduce the debt, simplify compliance, and make the economy more fair. Our tax code has been mauled by this one big, beautiful bill, and frankly, it really can't be fixed anymore with piecemeal adjustments. It has to be scrapped and started over. Surging one-on-one tutoring to every student in America, which is particularly important after the school closures have left 25 million American students behind on reading and mathematics. Building 1,000 trade schools to prepare us to build the things we need in this country, including more ships in the Chinese Navy, 5 Hoover Dams worth of nuclear power, and even entirely new cities on federal and state land. Tripling the reach of community health centers, so vital at a time when addiction and behavioral health are an increasing part of our healthcare apparatus. Curing Alzheimer's disease by 2040, reining in the imperial presidency through reforms to Article 2, ending partisan primaries and gerrymandering and dark money, combating anti-Semitism, defining and securing victory in Ukraine, taxing and regulating the social media corporations, and more. The core idea is that Americans have rejected the corrupt status quo, and unless Democrats offer a bold new vision, we will continue to lose to a party that is seen as more disruptive and energizing, and I intend to be part of crafting and executing that vision for the Democrats. And I'll close with a final and guiding principle, which is far more abstract than the policies or the politics above. And this final principle is less a point of view than a call to action, which is that we must weave back together a shared reality for this country after the epistemic unraveling of the last 15 years. We are having an extremely hard time as a country agreeing on basic facts and on a shared truth. And if you can't agree on those things, then you can't have a debate about opinions. Our truth-seeking institutions, from education to law to science, are being degraded and outcompeted by merchants of outrage and conspiracy, the social media platforms, the cable news channels, and grifters of all stripes. And it's going to take all of us over the course of the next generation to help repair our truth-seeking institutions and to help rebuild a shared reality for ourselves as a country, because with a shared reality comes a sense of a shared destiny and comes a more civil politics. And I hope to be part of that vision as well. I now would be happy to take questions from constituents here. And I would just ask during these questions, I'm not sure if Dana said this, please hold any audience feedback, either positive or negative. I want to let people ask their questions without feeling judged in one way or another, and I'll respond after 2 of them have been asked.
Thanks, Congressman. I forgot that bit about the responses. Okay, so here's how this is going to go. Katerina has pulled the first 4 tickets. They're up on the board. I'll read them out, but after this point, we won't be reading them. And you can look at the last 3 digits on those tickets. There's like a long number, but just look at the last 3. So if you have ticket 173, 413, 038, or 047, you may come up to these microphones. If you are not feeling like you want to ask a question right now, that's okay. We'll pull up the next numbers. This is a bit of an honor system, so please come on up if we have your number. And as the Congressman said, we'll sort of cue a question from each of the microphones. And so this gentleman with Kian will ask his question first, and then this person will ask their question, and then the Congressman will answer questions. As they are asking their questions, Katerina will put up the next 2, and we'll just sort of get this flywheel going, and hopefully this will all work out. This is our first time doing it this way. All right. So.
Oh, thank you. Congressman,
Hi.
I hate to start with this question because it seems so trivial, but why isn't Congress speaking out against Donald Trump giving himself a $1 billion gift with that stupid airplane?
Gentle reminder, we'll get through a lot more questions if we don't respond, but now our second question will be asked, and then the Congressman will answer those questions in pairs, and Katerina has put up the next 2 numbers, so please come on up to the mics. That way we'll have our next folks queued up.
Hi, Representative. In the vein of trying to reinvigorate the Democratic Party, do you see the path forward as getting out some of the ineffective leadership that we have at the top line, or do you see that as amending our nationally unpopular stances on the war in Gaza, on Medicare for all, or do you see a different path forward?
So I think I outlined a lot of the ideas that I've been putting forward, and I won't go through the roster again, but my core point is that we tend, I think, as a party, as maybe the broader electorate, to get too fixated on people, on a candidate, on the person that's going to save, quote unquote, save the party or save the country, when really what we need is bigger and better ideas, ideas to build out a platform, ideas to animate voters, and absolutely ideas on foreign policy and ideas on healthcare are absolutely critical, and I've put forward ideas on both. Regarding Medicare for all, we think we absolutely need to take on the health insurance corporations that have been raising premiums at a rate about twice as fast as wages in the last 25 years, and I've led legislation in Congress, both in a partisan and bipartisan format, to go after, in particular, the pharmacy benefit managers, which are owned by the health insurance corporations and which are the middlemen of drug pricing, extracting about $100 to $300 billion every year in rents without actually doing any of the science themselves. And that's one example of, I think, a bigger fight that we have to have with the health insurance corporations to take on the rent-seeking and the greed that is costing about 20% of a middle-class family's take-home pay. And we do need to march towards an expanded footprint for the government in the provision of health care. I think it's much more practical and probably more effective to do so at the state level through Medicaid. As many of you know, Medicaid has come under attack with this one big beautiful bill in which the president, it'll probably cost Massachusetts between $2 to $3.5 billion every year just in Medicaid cuts year over year. And I think that instead of retreating or posturing in a defensive crouch, we actually should go on the attack as Democrats about Medicaid. Medicaid is popular, Medicaid is effective, Medicaid is much lower administrative overhead than commercial payers do, and we should actually march towards a Medicaid for all type of system where actually our mass health starts to offer automatic basic universal coverage, still giving Americans choice to buy supplemental health insurance if they so want it, because I don't believe in taking away choice from people, but I do believe in automatic basic and universal coverage, and I think mass health is well positioned for it. In terms of the airplane and corruption, I mean, so yes, I have pointed that out. I would just actually say that the airplane wasn't even the most corrupt thing he did that week. The crypto dinner that he had, because with the airplane, you at least knew who owned the president. Like the Qataris were clearly buying favor, and Americans could see that there was the Qataris. Here's the thing about the crypto, that the Trump meme coin, which Elizabeth Warren and I have been hounding him on, is we don't know who owns that. We don't know who owns the president. Is it the Russians? Is it the Turks? Is it the Qataris? Is it the Venezuelans? Is it the Chinese? Probably all of them, frankly. 50 to 90% of his net worth is tied up into a coin that people can own anonymously, but demonstrate to him, one-on-one, confidentially and securely, that they own part of his net worth. That's a violation of the Emoluments Clause, and it's just very clearly bad policy. It's one of the reasons I voted against the Genius Act, which was legislation for stable coins that was in Congress 2 weeks ago as part of their crypto week, is that I just cannot get behind legislation that would put the imprimatur of Congress on, one, corporations issuing their own currency, which this bill allowed, but number two, that through its silence, I think gave too much credence to the idea that the president could be allowed to issue his own meme coin.
There was a question outside that somebody was hoping that you would be asked, so I'm going to ask it. If you're planning on visiting Alligator Alcatraz. At one point in time, I came through Arbondale, Polk County, but the question I have following off of that is a constitutional thing. I think our prison systems are dismal. Why don't we begin to think about maybe citizens going into, or elected representatives on a regular basis visiting our prisons? It's a constitutional right of, just basic right of cruel and unusual punishment. There was a young man who died, a schizophrenic young man who died in the Fulton County Jail in Georgia of bed bugs. He was anemic, he had never seen a judge, he had never been arraigned, and he died a year, no medical care, in a metal cage in the United States. So they follow through.
Hi. This is regarding the U.S.-backed war in the Middle East. I wondered whether if you or other people in Congress had not accepted AIPAC money, whether you'd change your feeling about speaking about Israel-Palestine.
I have, yeah, as we said, please no audience feedback. Let me get through all these questions here. So I speak out quite a lot about the war in the Middle East, and I think we as citizens and as policymakers have to hold in our heads competing convictions and ideas. One is that Hamas is singularly responsible for the atrocities in the Middle East right now. Please let me get through this. I know we got sharp emotions, but the feedback is not going to help us have a conversation. Hamas has singular. Hamas.
You're okay with it when it's positive, right? You were all for it when they were clapping for positive.
So just a reminder, we said this before we got started, we're going to reduce the reactions, that way we can have the conversation and the question and answer.
Yeah, I'm very used to having brusque back and forth. I do it all the time in congressional testimony, but I do give my respondents at the congressional table a chance to respond, so please give me that chance. The Hamas is singularly responsible and has singular power to end this atrocity right now by releasing the hostages. It is also true that Israel has de facto responsibility by virtue of its power and presence in Gaza to ensure appropriate humanitarian conditions, and the humanitarian conditions in Gaza are not acceptable right now. And the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, while the concept of bypassing UNRWA, which had been ridden through with Hamas, can be sound, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not doing a good enough job of dispersing humanitarian aid. They need to expand the number of distribution sites above 4. They need to offer a wider range of aid. They need to do a better job of coordination with other humanitarian aid organizations. And the president needs to put more pressure on both parties to reach an agreement that includes the unconditional release of hostages and no role for Hamas in post-war governance in Gaza. In terms of visiting Alligator Alcatraz, I might. As a member of Congress, I reserve the right to visit any immigration detention facility unannounced, and I've used that prerogative before to visit a constituent of mine being held in the Burlington ICE facility who was then released. And we'll continue to have vigorous oversight, particularly since ICE has now been given, I think, $75 billion as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill, is now more funded than, I think, the 9 next law enforcement agencies in the federal government. So it's becoming an internal police force of considerable scale, and it's going to need strong congressional oversight, including unannounced visits. I would note, though, that this is another example of where Massachusetts, like with Medicaid, has programs and services where we should lean into them. Our jails here in Massachusetts, under the leadership of the sheriffs, particularly Sheriff Contusion in Middlesex and others, have actually become some of the best exemplars of substance use and mental health treatment. And so it's not the case that we have to have a separate carceral system and a separate healthcare delivery system, even though the populations are very intertwined. We're seeing under the sheriff's progressive leadership that actually recidivism is going down, and mental health and addiction services have been found to be very effective, and we should lean into that Massachusetts model even further. Nope, no feedback, please.
Good evening. Hi, I'm a physician, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a Harvard alum, I'm a Tufts academician, but first of all, I'm a US citizen, I'm a Newton resident, and I'm a human. And I stand up here, I didn't plan to say anything, I took that little blue thing out front, and what horrifies me is the situation in Gaza and the starving that's going on right now. And you are a wonderful communicator. And I want to know how you will communicate. My greatest wish is that we don't see any more images on that TV that horrify me, to watch these children starving, and adults starving too. Just children. And they knew this was coming. So I would like to hear, I heard what you said before, but I want to hear, you're a communicator. I'm so impressed by how you communicate with us and, you know, social media and everything else, but I want to hear how you're going to communicate that starvation is not what my tax dollars should go to.
Yep. Please.
Yeah. Hi. I like the idea of having a shared reality. I was just wondering what ideas you have and how you think that Congress, perhaps in the future, can move towards a shared reality.
Yeah. So I hear the sense of emotional urgency behind Gaza. I've addressed that issue. I'm not going to continue to address the issue. I do not believe that there is this false conception put forward sometimes in our media that somehow you are either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. I just fundamentally reject that. I am strongly pro-Israel, and I am strongly in favor of security and dignity for the Palestinian people as well. And the two are not just not in conflict, they are in fact consonant. It has been Hamas that has immiserated the Palestinian people for 15 years. It has been Hamas that has violated 6 ceasefires. It has been Hamas that murdered babies and used sexual violence. It has been Hamas who executed 6 hostages underground. And you can keep the feedback. And the international pressure on Hamas, who is still keeping 20 human beings underground in terror tunnels 500 days after the October 7th atrocities, to release those hostages would end the war immediately. It would end it immediately. And Hamas would rather keep human beings underground than it would. And as I said earlier, the reality that Hamas is a singularly evil organization does not excuse Israel from a failure to plan and to execute a humanitarian and logistic strategy to ensure that there is no starvation. It is unacceptable. I have communicated that's unacceptable.
What are we doing about it?
Regarding the question about shared reality, which this issue certainly inspires a sense of atomization and fracture, the most important thing that Congress could do to be able to align on issues would be to get rid of the primary system. The biggest problem that we have in Congress is there's 435 members of Congress, and 400 of them are not oriented towards November in the general election. They're oriented towards their primaries. And what that means is that they get pulled to their flanks. Even though if they're, most of the Republicans in Congress are decent people. You can go out to dinner with them and they're fine. But the problem is they're oriented towards the hardcore MAGA base. And so they can't vote for things that even the median, the average person in their district actually would support. And we have some states that have done innovative things to move past partisan primaries, which were put in place in 1968 and have served us very poorly. Alaska, California, Washington State. And the way we should run elections is the same way that we run mayoral elections in Newton, for example, in Boston and elsewhere, which is just top two, advance, regardless of party. Every candidate runs in every election, every voter can vote in every election, and you modulate some of the extremism that we're seeing.
Thank you, Congressman. We're going to go to our next two questions. And as we do so, I appreciate the interest in shouting and having that be our forum, but that is not how we're running this meeting this evening. Please know that we can always speak to you. You can call our office. We can provide long-form answers that the congressman himself has written. So, we want to have this opportunity to speak and to have this give and take, but it's just not going to be constructive if we're shouting. So we'll go to the next two questions. We'll start here, and then we'll go there.
Hi, Jake. I'm one of your constituents. Reports from credible international organizations and videos verified by journalists show that Israel has repeatedly bombed civilian areas, killed children, and even fired on people waiting for food. I've listened to you repeat the same points in Zoom town halls and written responses. Israel has a right to defend itself and that Hamas uses civilians as human shields. Let's be clear, Hamas is guilty of war crimes. However, that does not absolve Israel responsibility for its own. You've approved military aid with no conditions, while tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians, including thousands of children, have been killed, many with no connections to Hamas. So I'm asking you clearly, and please nod your head, do you believe killing children and civilians in the name of strategic defense is ever justified? Yes or no? Massachusetts has paid over $6 million funding Israel war on Palestine.
We got the question. Thank you. Appreciate that. We're going to move to the next question. Thank you.
That was incredibly rude.
In addition to that, you say that the humanitarian condition in Gaza is unacceptable, but what are you doing about the starving children in Gaza? What are you doing? What are you doing to prevent the use of our taxes to starve and kill people in Gaza?
Yeah,
You were elected by us. Remember that.
I've addressed Israel and Gaza now on, I think, 3 separate occasions, so we're going to keep moving on.
We're going to move on to the next questions. If you have, please.
Hi. So the midterms are coming up next year, and I appreciate your ability to communicate us, the constituents here, and I applaud you for doing that and having these town forums. But what are your fellow Democrats doing to make sure that their agenda gets heard to the open population? Massachusetts is just a microcosm. We're not the rest of the United States, and I really feel that there's a need to get the message out, and it's not happening. So what are you guys doing about that?
Well, okay, yeah.
Next question.
I actually had a similar question. On the web, there were some pundits, experts, talking about the fact that Trump's policies seemingly don't benefit anyone, and I mean any people in the U.S. Therefore, his preferred candidates are likely to lose in elections. And so the thought was that he will do everything he can to prevent there being elections in 26 and 28. So my question is, what are you and other members of Congress doing to make sure that we have free elections in the next, at least in the next couple rounds?
Yeah, so as you know, the president doesn't run elections. The elections aren't national in nature. They're state run, and in many cases really actually locally administered, which is a good thing. It's a bulwark, creates an anti-fragile electoral system, and we strengthened it after January 6th with the Electoral Count Reform Act, which closed some of the loopholes that he had tried to use to steal the election. And there are important civil society organizations, including protectdemocracy.org, which has got a lot of members here in Newton, who do terrific work supporting state and local election officials so that we have free and fair administration of elections. I don't expect the president is going to try to cancel the midterms, and that's the reason I say that. One, again, he can't do it, but two, I mean, he's actively trying to get Texas and Ohio to gerrymander their maps to take more Republican seats, which suggests that he certainly plans for there to be midterms. And while I don't think we should have the partisan gerrymandering system, redistricting system, I should say, that this country seems to favor, I would rather use independent commissions that have like New Jersey does, or other states that are much more impartial and more fair. We don't really have the luxury for academic perfection right now. If they're going to try to steal 5 to 7 Republican seats in Texas and Ohio, then we'd better demonstrate that we're willing to do redistricting in California as well to hit back. Again, it's not the way I hoped things, it's not the democratic ideal, but we are in a knockout, drag-out brawl right now. And then the question about Dems in the midterms, so you're right, I'm in Massachusetts. I think one area that I can be effective is by helping to put forward a new, invigorated, bold platform of ideas, and I've done that through a couple of different organizations. Build America, which has been an economic focused, as well as Majority Democrats, which is combined with mayors and state house officials across the country to try to help reinvigorate the Democratic Party across the nation. I would say, though, that we are still a year and a half out and a year and a quarter out. And one thing we know about this one big beautiful bill is that it's not popular. The majority of voters don't like it, and that's before they actually learn all the details about it. When they learn the details, they like it even less. And in particular, they hate the healthcare portion of this. So, if I had to choose one sentence that's going to define what we're talking about over the next year, it's Donald Trump just raised your healthcare bills. And we got to hammer that message home in places that voted for him purely or mostly on an inflation fatigue agenda. He is not helping with inflation when your healthcare bill goes up as much as it's about to go up because of these cuts.
Okay, next 2 questions.
Hi. I was reading today that it seems that Brown University has capitulated to some of the current Trump's extortion charges that he's, and just a couple of days ago, we heard that Harvard seemed to capitulate to his extortion, and Columbia is now before it capitulated as well. So I was wondering what you, there's the basic question of how exactly is this legal? Or is it legal and demanding hundreds of thousands of dollars from these universities to pay to the federal government? And secondly, what do you think what's the sort of long-term outlook? How do you think this is going to end up? Where's this going to end exactly? Yeah. Because they're kind of degrading one of America's greatest products, which is its universities, and they're kind of destroying that in the process. Thanks.
Hello, Congressman. It's so good to see you again. I just really briefly thank you for meeting with myself and my interns last May to hear about legislation that we wrote to support fertility health care at a federal level. You know, this is the first bipartisan bill, which of course has stalled a bit right now. But I agree with you, we have to find a way to communicate and work together and compromise to be able to move forward. Now that the big, beautiful bill has passed and there's looking at cuts to health care, the Democrats love this bill because it improves access to health care. The Republicans like the bill because it helps federal and state revenue by having this legislation. And yet there's a stall with trying to come to an agreement with a religious exemption. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for me, who's trying to lobby at the federal level to get a bill passed, to work bipartisan when there is this obstacle. You have experience with it. I'd love to learn from it.
Yeah, I mean, briefly, and at the end of September, there is going to be an expiration of a number of key healthcare programs, sort of telehealth exemptions and community health center funding, I believe, and one other program for hospitals. And so that creates an impetus for Congress to pass something, either as part of a continuing resolution or some other mechanism, and that becomes a vehicle on which to pass legislation that may, not be as salient, but has bipartisan support. So that is something that we can certainly look at. Regarding the universities, our universities, I had spoken in my opening remarks about truth-seeking institutions, and our universities are meant to be truth-seeking institutions without fear or favor, pursue truth regardless of who it makes uncomfortable. And I think our universities in the last 5 to 10 years have really struggled with that. I think Harvard and other elite universities have been captured by progressive orthodoxies in a way that created a monoculture on campus, and that's not healthy. I think 3 to 5% of faculty at Harvard identify as conservative. That's not acceptable for a university that's training the next generation of American leaders. We should have a cacophony of ideas debated. And so these universities do need to reject some of that. They also should not be bullied by the authoritarian right, and certainly not give any power over hiring and firing decisions or curriculum development to any political actor. That is anathema, as you said, to their independence. And so I want to see the terms of a deal before I weigh in on it. Brown's deal, for example, which I was just reviewing today, it's very recent, Brown's deal did not give the administration any power over hiring and firing, did not give the administration any power over curriculum development, and had Brown pay, I think, $50 million to workforce development institution of its choosing in Rhode Island. If there was a deal where Harvard was paying some money to build trade schools in Massachusetts and it didn't give any power over curriculum or faculty to the administration, and it resumed all the federal funding, I think that's a deal they should look at. And Harvard has a lot of work to do to regain its own truth-seeking ability, and it's doing that work under the leadership of Alan Garber, who I think has been ably leading over the last year in very, very exceptionally hard circumstances.
Next 2 questions, and I forgot to mention earlier, if you agree with something, you can use American Sign Language with your hands up like this to agree, because I know people want to agree, and so you can do that, and then that way we don't have bias and taking a lot of time.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. So I'm a physician researcher for many years, funded by NIH. Of course, I don't understand what Trump is doing about why he wants to cut NIH when it's one of the jewels of America. And not only that, it's an incredible economic engine, both in red and blue states. So recently, it's an up and down experience with them. Like last night, OMB said, let's stop all funding, and then that changed. I was impressed about 2 weeks ago that I think 12 or 14 Republican senators wrote a note to Trump asking him to release all funds. So my question is, my thought is, why isn't the Republicans and the Democrats jointly, this is a joint idea, work together to issue a statement how important NIH research is and to keep supporting it and stop playing with it.
So thank you for speaking with us this evening. You've touched on this topic already, but I just am so perplexed by the question of why your colleagues on the other side of the aisle march in lockstep. Surely some of them have a conscience. Some of them must know the Constitution. Is it just fear of being reelected? Is it all about job security? And why, if it were, why can't there be something like a pact formed among the moderate Republicans, as many as there are, to just en bloc oppose Trump, vote with their conscience? Surely they can't all be targeted.
Yes, it's all about fear. Members of Congress are no different than any other profession, which is to say, 90% are decent people trying to do the right thing most of the time, and 10% are not, and the 10% are constantly kind of ruining things for everybody else. But in most professions, they get marginalized, that 10%. In my profession, they get a lot of Instagram followers and become Speaker of the House. So we have a problem in the incentive structure where capitulation gets rewarded and speaking your conscience doesn't. And I wish that wasn't true. Like, I wish Liz Cheney were president, or not president, but we're the viable Republican nominee, right, when she tried to run or something. But it just didn't happen that way. Like, she just got totally ostracized by her party, and every other member saw that, and they're just very afraid. And I feel like I can share this now because he's no longer in office, but I was able to fly with Joe Biden on Air Force One to come visit the district a couple years ago, and I figured I should ask him for advice as the president. And so I said, Mr. President, do you have any advice for me? And he said, know what you're willing to lose for. Know what you're willing to lose for. And I thought that was poignant advice from someone who's been in office for a long time. And they don't know what they're willing to lose for. And I see that every day, and I always kind of make this resolution to myself that I need to know what I'm willing to lose for, because you can lose your soul there very quickly if you don't have that. In terms of the NIH funding, so the NIH has about $35 billion budget, and as you said, it returns probably $2.5 to $3 on every dollar spent. It's one of the best economic engines this country has. The president is proposing halving it to $17 billion, a complete own goal, particularly at a time, by the way, when China is building multitude of Kendall Squares throughout the country and overtaking us in biotech and biomedical R&D. And what's happening, thankfully, is a playbook that we know works, which is when across the Republicans, business, and national defense, you get pushback to the president's bad ideas. When those three work in tandem, you tend to see changes. And cutting the NIH is such an astoundingly bad idea that we did see that pushback, and I do have confidence that his $17 billion approach would not be appropriated as part of a full government funding bill. What I am worried about is that he would use pocket rescissions, that he would pass a budget and then through OMB cut it with a simple majority line vote in the Congress. That would be a hard vote too, even for the Republicans, but that is a much more likely scenario that we have to be on guard against. We did in fact try, so I just put forward a resolution with the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee about the NIH's value just last week, and we tried to get Republicans and they wouldn't do it in the House. In the Senate, I was happy to see that there was that Republican support, but we now do have a Democrat and Republican statement, even if they're separate statements, for the NIH. And I also just got the Congressional Budget Office to release a report today, actually, me and the ranking member of the Budget Committee, that they did more in-depth economic analysis that basically showed even more clearly what a good value NIH funding is. It showed that it actually reduces deficits, for example, over the long run. And we're hoping to use that as well for the government funding debate to say, you cut the NIH, it's not even saving, it's not even saving money for the federal government.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for speaking with us today. I had more of a clarifying question. So there's currently a lot of cuts across the board, including DEI ones, and that's losing people not only their jobs, but the support that they need. So I just wanted to ask, how is Congress planning to combat this and help the people?
Good evening, Congressman. My name's Nancy Downs. I'm with Oceana. First, I want to thank you for co-sponsoring the New England Coastal Protection Act, which would stop offshore drilling off of the coast of New England. I'm here to talk about an adjacent issue, which is related to petrochemicals, which is plastic pollution in our oceans and national parks. The first bill is H.R. 1918, introduced by Rep. Doggett, called the Farewell to Foam Act. And the other one is H.R. 3604 by Rep. Quigley, reducing waste in national parks. Plastic pollution is built from petrochemicals, and particularly polystyrenes. Building block styrene is a probable known carcinogen. So this is a climate change issue, an environmental health issue, a public health issue, a waste management issue, and asking if we can count on you co-sponsoring those two bills. Thank you.
Certainly we'll look at those bills, and in general, I've been a very strong supporter of reducing plastic waste, particularly single-use plastic waste, but you know, as you know, and as you alluded to, probably the biggest threat to the health of our oceans, other than climate change ourselves, is plastic pollution. And we need to do a better job at the federal level of, one, reducing the use of plastics overall, but two, also inducing more private sector innovation around replacements to plastics, because there's a lot of uses of plastics that could be replaced. And I'm on the committee of jurisdiction for a lot of that work, and absolutely will look at that legislation. I'm also, in tandem, doing a lot of work on PFAS, which in Massachusetts, we unfortunately have a fair bit of PFAS density in our soil and on our water supplies, because we're a pretty densely populated state. And this administration has cut a lot of the funding for clean water, particularly for municipal clean water supplies, and has claimed that somehow, you know, new technology will solve all of this, even though they have no funding for it. And so we are working to try to get in the reauthorization of the Toxic Substance Control Act some type of even incremental gains on PFAS regulation, because it's very, very hard to get PFAS out of drinking water supplies. It's at 4 parts per trillion, but at the point of production, that is the point to get it out of there. That's when it's most easily regulated. For DEI cuts, you know, DEI is, it's across a whole number of different programs and services, so I think it's helpful to be specific about different instances. The ones that are probably most concerning to me have been in clinical trials, and what the administration has done through the NIH is halted funding for clinical trials because they claimed that the clinical trials were DEI or they were woke clinical trials or whatever, even though the clinical trials, what they were trying to do was have a patient population that matched the general population with the disease, including times where the disease had a disproportionate impact on the black population. And so we have successfully pushed back on some of that and have been able to restart those funds for clinical trial diversity. And as part of a new piece of legislation that I'm hoping to work on in the next term, we're going to try to do more on clinical trial regulations and clinical trial diversity.
One of the things, hi, my name is David Temez. I'm with Newton Indivisible. One of my concerns is the de-alignment of the Democratic Party that started during the Carter administration. And we have been losing our working class voters, and this has been going on for a long time. And I know how you talk about how higher education needs to get a little less progressive. Well, I think Congress needs to get a little less enamored with neoliberal economics. And I'd really like to know, what are you going to do so the Democrats do get their game, and getting game means bringing back working class voters to our party?
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Congressman. I know you spoke earlier about like the Trump coin and these kind of invisible secret funding opportunities, but me personally, I'm also equally as concerned with super PACs and even publicly viewable funding from huge corporations, as well as things like APAC. And I was just wondering if you particularly, or anyone you know of, has any plans to try to reduce this problem where a lot of elections are won by money instead of by policy or by outreach or stuff like that, because that money is just so crucial to be able to run a campaign. Like, are we going to try to get something back like McCain, Feingold? I mean, I know Citizens United makes it pretty tough to work around that, but anything of that sort to try to reduce our politicians having their pockets being filled and just being totally bought out.
I think there's there's two near-term things that we can do on campaign finance. As you said, Citizens United was a disastrous Supreme Court decision, and I've voted in favor of legislation repeatedly that would at least partially overturn it. The most promising two avenues. One is Maine has a piece of litigation right now, or I should say Maine has a state law that caps the amount of contributions to a super PAC. And that's going to get litigated. They're going to get sued for it. It's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And it's basically a chance for the Supreme Court to partially correct Citizens United with a different jurisdiction and a different issue at hand. Because if you can cap the contributions to the super PACs, that is a backdoor way to being able to cap the overall spending of the super PACs. The other big issue is we should ban stock trading by members of Congress. Or meme coins or anything that gives people even the impression that members of Congress are voting out of their wallet as opposed to for the public good. And I have been a consistent supporter of banning stock trading by members. On working class voters, listen, we could do a whole 90 minutes on this one question. I'll point to two things. One, the Democratic Party needs to stop condescending. We have a problem where voters view us as preachy. And if voters view us as preachy as a party, then they stop being curious about any kind of economic policies. You can't be afraid and curious at the same time. Neurologically, your brain cannot do it. And when someone feels judged, they feel afraid. And they stop listening about any economic ideas. And a big part of the country feels judged. And we got to knock that off. It's it incites an allergy in the electorate. The other issue that we have to do, and here we have is lean into economic tailwinds. The biggest trend in the workforce in the last couple of years is that the fastest growing jobs are the trades. HVAC technician, plumber, electrician. These are the jobs that are most in demand right now, and actually hiring for new college grads is actually starting to plateau for a number of reasons. And so we have this demand for trades that don't require a 4-year college degree. But I don't think we're doing a good enough job of matching employers with educators to create a robust pipeline. So we got to build out more trade schools. We got to lean into our unions who do a terrific job, the electrical workers, the operating engineers, the building trades, in preparing young people for these jobs. And we've got to lionize the dignity of work, dirty hands and clean money.
Hi, my question is regarding public health. Right now, public health has been significantly under attack with the Big Beautiful Bill, but also a lack of trust for science, medical professionals. Is there anything that Congress or you are planning to do to kind of reach across the aisle and help support those who are in the medical profession or those who are lobbying you in order to get stronger access to public health and better access to healthcare overall?
Congressman, thank you for taking my question on day 663 of the hostages' captivity in Gaza. You took a question from me back in January, and by the way, thank you very much for having these meetings. You're still the most responsive congressman that we've had here in 40 years. You took a question from me in January, and you said that you would speak up in favor of the Trump administration when they were right, including about the Middle East. And now I have to ask you a question from a different point of view, from the organized, arguably anti-Semitic, organized indecency, pro-Trump rhetoric that you heard earlier. Now the shoe is flipped. Trump is now coming out and amplifying the false allegations of starvation in Gaza. And will you oppose him on that?
Okay. They're not false allegations of starvation. There is dire humanitarian conditions in Gaza that need to be immediately and urgently reversed. And Israel does have responsibility to do that. Now, this president on foreign policy, he changes his mind and he vacillates, so it is hard to have focus. It's important that he is speaking out about it, but the question is he going to use his leverage, which is considerable, with the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's coalition to insist on a wider aperture of humanitarian relief?
Sir, the problem is he has already.
Sorry?
The problem is he has already. That's part of the problem.
Well, Israel, after October 7th, was surrounded by 6 different terror armies, as well as Iran, funding them all and threatening nuclear annihilation. And strong support for Israel has eradicated 4 of those terror armies and has marginalized the other 2. And Iran is in a weaker spot than it has been since the Shah was deposed. So Israel is in a much stronger position in the Middle East than it was 2.5 years ago, which gives it, I think, a stronger position at the negotiating table with Hamas. I think the terms are closer than they have been in recent memory. Hamas was the last one to walk away from the deal, to be clear, but the president has the unique power to bring both parties back and to insist that the Qataris put way more pressure on Hamas leadership than they have to date. And there needs to be the unconditional release of hostages, and there needs to be no role for Hamas in post-war governance of Gaza. But those 2 imperatives cannot be allowed to prevent humanitarian aid from reaching Gazans. On public health, the biggest, for Massachusetts right now, the most important issue is the negotiation of the 1115 waiver. So for everyone's awareness, basically every 5 years, Massachusetts, Mass Health, which runs our Medicaid here in Massachusetts, Medicaid is a state-federal program. So both Washington and Massachusetts have a big say in how it's run. And every 5 years, Massachusetts does a waiver where it negotiates terms of how it gets to run Medicaid. And that waiver has been a good deal for Massachusetts. It's allowed us to do innovative things on behavioral health and innovative things on addiction and pay our hospitals in a different way and move towards value-based care and to a certain extent. And it's broadly a good thing. This waiver negotiation coming up is going to happen in 26 and 27, and it's a big deal for our state. It's half of our state budget, and it's about how we deliver care to people. It's about how we pay for care. It's about who is eligible for that care. And I intend to be a big part of that waiver negotiation because it's a federal-state partnership. And I think, without going into all the details here, we have to negotiate much more boldly than in years past. It's one thing when you're negotiating with the Biden administration. Frankly, it was even another thing when you were negotiating with the first Trump administration, whose Health and Human Services secretary was like a normal administrator. It's all different now. It's totally different. And we need a lot more autonomy to run things our own way. And we have to be willing to accept a little bit more risk in order to get that autonomy. Because on the status quo, with $2 billion of cuts every single year and an incredible amount of paperwork requirements and bureaucracy about work and immigrants and all this stuff, it's not tenable. Our hospitals are gonna get crushed. So we need to really think differently.
Congressman, thank you for being here. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity. I'm going to keep on the whole healthcare, public health thing going on here, and I appreciate that that's something that you're looking to talk about and discuss. I'm on the city council, and we had a really hard time passing our budget this year because our healthcare costs went up 11.2%. Communities all across the state are facing that. Families here are facing that. And though we have near universal coverage in Massachusetts, people can't afford it, and with all the other high costs. So I'd love to hear some of your ideas about how we can specifically move towards what I think single payer can help us with controlling costs and allocating care more fairly. I'm in the 10th Middlesex District, and there was a ballot question last November that said, shall the representative for the district, this is at the state level, be instructed to vote for legislation to create a single-payer system of universal health care that provides all Massachusetts residents with comprehensive health care, including the freedom to choose doctors and other health care professionals. And it would create an insurance trust fund that is publicly administered. It passed by 68% in a relatively conservative part of Newton, also in Waltham, and part of Watertown. 19 other communities saw very similar results. So I'd love to see you dive into that and come up with policy initiatives that will help us keep good quality health care for all at a reasonable cost.
Congressman, I appreciate that you touched on Hamas and Israel earlier. My specific question is, what do you plan to do to end the killing of Palestinians in Gaza while they are trying to access food?
So on the question about healthcare, Allison, I agree with you that we want to have automatic, universal, basic coverage. And I think the vast majority of the electorate wants to get to there as well. I want there to be choice as well. I don't like taking away choice from people, and choice does mean that people should have the option to buy supplemental insurance products so that they can get different products or services if they want. I also am skeptical and remain skeptical of a federal single-payer initiative, because while that might sound great in theory in some ways, you know, remember who's running CMS right now, okay? It's RFK Jr., who ran an anti-vaccine campaign in American Samoa that cost 80 people their lives, who thinks that Wi-Fi gives you brain cancer. He is not somebody that should be in charge of 20% of the United States economy, and I certainly don't want him in charge of coverage decisions or payment decisions in that role for everybody. So I do think that just in the same way that federalism can be a bulwark for us at times when we don't agree with who's in the White House, for issues like elections or issues like law enforcement, where you remember that you're happy that you live in Massachusetts. Same thing can be true for healthcare. Be careful of vesting that much power and that much money in whoever happens to be president at the time. Whereas I do trust Mass Health. I think Mass Health can get this right, which is why this waiver opportunity, basically this negotiation, is an opportunity for us to march towards expanded coverage. Expanded coverage and cost containment, which is critical, because right now, the middle class is spending about 20% of their take-home pay on healthcare and the other 30% plus on housing, which means that half of a middle-class family's income is just housing and healthcare, period, both of which are going up faster than wages. If that continues, we're just going to asphyxiate the middle class. I've addressed the Gaza-Hamas issue on numerous times.
So you don't plan to do anything to end the killing of Palestinians in Gaza?
I've responded to it in many different ways.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to thank you for my turn. I will be retiring after 39 years of teaching public schools in Massachusetts in June. I listened to you recently with Jonathan Gruber talk about your new cities and was so interested in hearing more about Build America and New Cities, because I need to apply. There's really no place near family in Massachusetts that I can really afford. I'm renting health insurance and rent for an experienced teacher with 5 certifications and 39 years experience. I can't even touch anything. So want to hear more about it and what I can do to help, and just to delve into that. And
Absolutely.
Maybe you can summarize it, but it sounds really exciting to me and really important for communities.
Thank you.
Congressman, first of all, I'd like to say that I take great pride in the fact that you and Elizabeth Warren represent us.
Thank you.
And I think you're doing a spectacular job. I know it's not an easy job, and probably thankless as well. But so I'm an unenrolled voter and always have been since my first time I was eligible to vote. I've never made a political contribution until last year, when I felt the situation was urgent and there was a constitutional crisis on the horizon. I'm a little panic-stricken right now about the direction our country is going in. I'm still hesitant, however, so last year I made substantial, for me, donations to the Democratic Party, and I'm hesitant to do so now, despite the twice-a-day mailings, because, right? Because,
not from me, though.
Not from you, yeah. When you have something to say, I get your email, or I'm invited to something, and I think that's perfect. But, so I'm hesitant to donate any more money until I have an understanding of if the Democrats should be fortunate enough to gain back both the House and the Senate in 26, like, what are they going to do? So I just keep hoping that behind the scenes, while all this is going on, that the party is accumulating information, documenting things, so that they will be able to act. And I guess my question is, what would be the top 3 to 5 things that would happen immediately in 26? We saw what Trump did on day one with the executive orders. What would the Democratic Party do?
Yeah. Well, the two questions are sort of linked together in a certain way because to me, affordability needs to be front and center for what we would do on day one. And the former teacher was talking about how rent and healthcare are consuming so much of her budget, which is the story across Massachusetts and across the country. And our party needs to basically make a pledge, I think, to the American middle class that we are not going to let housing and healthcare consume your budget, that we are going to keep this at, paying a third of your overall pay for housing and healthcare is manageable. Paying half is not. That is when you start not being able to breathe at the end of the month. And we got to be serious about that. Healthcare policy, that means taking on some of the corporate bad actors. That means expanding access to at-home and community-based care. The biggest cost driver right now for Mass Health and for Medicaid is basically hospital care for people or long-term hospital or nursing care for people who might be able to get it at home with telehealth, with technology, et cetera. So we got to take cost out of the system, but when we take cost out of the healthcare system, pass it on to people through their premiums. Because what's happening right now is cost may sometimes get taken out of the system, but it's not getting passed on, right? You look at United Health Group's earnings and you can tell it's not getting passed on. So we got to take on that. And then with housing, we got to build a lot more housing in this country. We are 5 to 7 million units short of housing. In Massachusetts, we're 250,000 units short of housing. The MBTA Communities Act, which passed a couple years ago, is one element of a way that we can build more housing and thereby put significant downward pressure on prices. But it's probably 10 to 15% of where we need to get, which leads to the question about building new cities. And it sounds like an ambitious out there proposal, but then you consider the fact that Massachusetts actually has a lot of state and federal land here. I'll give one example, which is Fort Devens, decommissioned military base about 40 minutes from Boston, tons of infrastructure, pretty good connectivity to the city, and it's just a massive brownfield site, and it's owned by the state. There's no local zoning. We could build 100,000 units of housing there and make a big dent in the housing production that we need.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. My understanding is, and I've heard just from you that you've taken an oath to the Constitution 7 times, which I really appreciate. We have a president in the White House right now who, Al Green from the 7th Congressional District of Texas, has drawn up impeachment papers twice for him, the last time being in the end of June. That was voted on, and it was voted to table. 128 Democrats voted to table this resolution. You were one of them. 19 impeachable offenses that have broken our Constitution and is continuing to do so. I want to know, aside from taking money from AIPAC, with respect, that's something that is infiltrated our government. And aside from saying that you wouldn't win because it doesn't matter if you would have won or not, it's about doing the right thing, how can you justify tabling impeachment papers and resolution to impeach this unlawful president?
A somewhat related question. I want to make clear I'm a lifetime Democrat, and I will probably continue to be. But I also feel that all 3 branches of our executive government are betraying the people of the United States right now. And that the one hope that we have is that Democrats will take at least one of the houses. However, the Democratic Party right now, last I read, was even less popular than Donald Trump. And I am wondering if there is any move to have a strategy to unite, to make Democrats not simply the default, but also a party that people want to vote for. I know we've touched on this in numbers of ways, but I'd like to ask it in a global way.
Yeah, so to the first question, a number of people have raised the AIPAC thing. Let me just address this head on. I know it wasn't actually part of the question, but I don't think there's any secret there's a lot of money in politics. AIPAC is a source of that money. There's a lot of other sources of that money that don't seem to get referred to or discussed nearly as much. And that kind of double standard is indicative of a double standard that exists, frankly, for Israel as well. Because I see a tremendous amount of furor about what's happening in Gaza with the humanitarian conditions, rightfully so. I hear nothing about the ethnic cleansing in Armenia or in Sudan or in Muslim populations in India or in Xinjiang province in China. So everybody here who's so fixated on pinning AIPAC with the blame for what's happening in Gaza needs to ask, where is your furor about these other regions and these other lobbies, right? It's a double standard. On the impeachment vote, so everyone in America gets due process, everybody, whether you're an undocumented immigrant, whether you're the President of the United States, you get due process. These impeachment articles did not contain any due process. There were no hearings, there was no fact-finding. This was one individual who drew them up and put them on the floor. And I believe that we should have had due process around those articles. But more to the political point, frankly, the House has not taken up those articles. Speaker Mike Johnson is not going to put up impeachment articles on the House floor. And if Democrats are seen as fixated on impeachment rather than health care, it undercuts our chances to win the midterms. And that is the whole ballgame. Everything we do has to be oriented around turning him into a lame duck next term. And that means not getting distracted. Because Democrats have been attacking Donald Trump ad nauseum for 10 years. And you know what? His favorability ratings are exactly the same as they were 10 years ago. So it's not working. And we've got to focus on not just how much we hate him, but on what we would do with power. How would we make people's lives better if we were in charge? Housing, health care, rule of law, law and order, national security. So I wasn't interested in letting, yet again, him set the overt window for debate. I'm interested in letting Democrats be fixated on what we want to talk about going into the midterms.
Hello, Jake. Thank you so much for being a representative and when you are our counselor as well.
Yes.
I have an oddball question. It's a topic I've heard discussed among friends and people of different political parties, but I've never heard politicians discuss it. And I'm curious if this ever comes up among you and your peers. Has there ever been discussion about universal service? As an alternative to the draft, but something where everybody, no exceptions, maybe when we graduate from high school or at a certain age, gives a year, you meet other people, you're learning a trade, whatever. It seems like a win-win, but I'm just curious if it ever comes up.
Yeah.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you. I wanted to mention that I'm Iranian American. I'm your constituent. I've studied Middle Eastern studies for my PhD at Harvard. I focused on Iranian, modern Iran in particular, but I also have family from Iran, and with this recent war, and I very much appreciate your supporting the War Powers resolution for that, because Donald Trump attacked Iran without consulting Congress, especially Democrats, obviously. And I had relatives who suffered. I have most of my relatives still over there, and a lot of them were displaced. They were in Tehran with Donald Trump's statement about everyone needs to evacuate Tehran, and there's 10 million people there. And some of my relatives were too elderly to evacuate. Isfahan was also struck, where most of my relatives are, and my cousin's baby couldn't sleep because of that, But this was started by, and I see it as a continuation in some way, by the government of Israel, right? An unprovoked attack, in my view. Obviously, it's complicated because there was tension there, but this seems to me, in my perspective, from Benjamin Netanyahu's, from like his strategy, where he has attacked multiple other nations, and I understand that some of the entities that were harmful against Israel were taken out. And any way that innocent lives can be saved, I very much appreciate that. And I very much appreciate your consideration and trying to be balanced of saying that innocent civilians, Palestinians should still be considered. And you did not repeat Benjamin Netanyahu's comments about there is no starvation in Gaza and several other people who are posing that. So if I could please just ask you, my question is there any way, and you're a veteran and you're very well versed in war, right? And I very much appreciate that. But is there a way that under any circumstances that you might consider, is it possible that Israel might be committing genocide and there might be, like, based on all of these human rights organizations, including 2 from Israel recently, 2 Israeli ones, there's a lot of Israelis who are also critical of Benjamin Netanyahu. Is there anything that you might mention that is one of the worst violations and violation of human rights by Israel that could be possibly violating our laws about innocent civilians? And if so, is there anything that, sorry to mention, if you could please mention, just to be humble and just to placate or address a lot of people here's concern, if you could please be honest and humble, and you are being very fair, and mention something, if you had to mention something, is there a violation of American law in regards to proportionality, which I've seen you mention about proportionality and the ways that you, if you were leading a military, would conduct affairs, and with all the journalists killed and all of the hospitals, mosques. Yes.
I've been clear and critical about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's inability to deliver aid. I think cutting out UNRWA, which by UNRWA's own admission was ransacked with Hamas affiliates, was the right decision, but not having an alternative is not acceptable, and the conditions on the ground are not acceptable and need to be remedied. I think one thing that gets missed in this conversation is those who are critical don't offer an alternative of how Israel is supposed to operate in this environment. So again, after October 7th,
how about similar to the United States, for example?
Hold on. So you had said said that Iran, it was an unprovoked assault on Iran. I would dispute that. So Iran has been waging war against Israel for decades. Iran has funded 6 different terror armies: Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, terror forces in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen.
Sorry, I meant immediately, like in terms of...
That was immediate. I mean, they were killing Israelis and Jews constantly, and Israel kept on cutting off the legs of the octopus, and you know what? At a certain point, Israel said, we're punching this octopus in the face. And that is the best way to deal with the menace that the Ayatollah had become. Iran's weakness opens up possibilities for commerce and culture to become the new bridges in the Middle East rather than conflict. It is to the benefit of the Iranian people to have the Ayatollah weakened. It is to the benefit of the Lebanese people to have Hezbollah weakened. It is to the benefit of the Palestinian people to have Hamas weakened. Taking out these barbaric actors helps to strengthen the Abraham Accords and helps to knit together the Middle East. So there is, again, I think, a false choice being put in front of us of, well, are you for Israel or are you for the Persian people?
I'm just asking about international humanitarian law.
And
could we follow that along with supporting, if you want to support Israel, if you want to support saving innocent Jewish lives?
I've tried to respond.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just meant international humanitarian law. Could we follow that?
On national service, yes, it's discussed. And actually, I will say this is an area that I've changed my mind on. I think when I first took Congress, I was skeptical, and I have changed my mind on that. I think it's a good idea. Very open to creative ways that it could be implemented. State-run, federal-run. Obviously, you would want to have alternatives to military service. That's not the right choice for everybody. But I think getting 18, 19-year-olds out there and building things and working together, teaching people, I don't know, maybe ban smartphones for 2 years during the national service. That'd be a heck of an idea, right? But just create that shared reality through service.
Thanks, Congressman. Just want to let folks know we have 15 minutes left for this forum, and we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. So let's keep a rapid clip going, and we'll see how many we can get going.
Hi, thank you so much. My name's Megan. I'm asking a health-related question. So do you have any response or plan to respond to the administration's plan to change Title X away from family planning and reproductive health access to natural infertility remedies, removing access to birth control, and keeping patients out of clinics that offer low-cost prenatal care? And do you think an administration that claims to be pro-family would do something like that? Thanks.
Hi, Congressman. We actually met after the community servings event last year, if you might remember. So I know you don't really want to take any more questions about Gaza, but I'm going to ask or reread this and ask you to think about it. And maybe this is something you can sign on to. It's House Resolution, oh my God, 473, that 7 out of the 9 members of Congress in Massachusetts have signed on to the Senate version. Both of our senators have signed on. I'm not going to read all of the whereases. There's a lot of those. I'm just going to read the last part, what's resolved, and I don't see why it's something that you can't sign on to. Resolved that the House of Representatives, 1, is gravely concerned with A, the humanitarian crisis and acute suffering of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and B, the suffering of the hostages and hostage families, and 2, calls on the White House, Department of State, and other relevant United States government agencies to urgently use all available diplomatic tools to bring about the release of the hostages, the immediate and secure delivery and disbursement of the necessary food and humanitarian aid for Palestinian civilians, and a durable end to the conflict in Gaza.
So as you said, you skipped over the whereas. A lot of times the whereases is where
I could read those too.
The static and sizzle happens in these congressional resolutions. I will look at it carefully. Okay. For sure, and I agree that the resolved, at first passing sound reasonable, but I want to look at the whereases. On Title X, no, I don't think an administration that's pro-family would do that, and I'm on legislation that would prevent that, that would insist that you make birth control and reproductive health care available through community health centers as well as through all federally funded programs, including Planned Parenthood. One element of this bill, One Big Beautiful Bill, has been really the defunding of Planned Parenthood in a lot of respects, which has been mischaracterized. It's being put forward as an anti-abortion play by the evangelical right. What they failed to understand is that it's really undermining health care for actually women and men. A lot of cancer screening, a lot of primary and preventative care happens at Planned Parenthood sites in addition to abortion services. And so it's just an anti-health care play more broadly. And I'm also on legislation that will expand access to fertility services, particularly for people who have cancer or are otherwise taking medications that may inhibit their fertility, making it easier for pharmaceutical companies to be able to pay for fertility services for them.
Hello, my name is Sophia. I just want to start by saying thank you for taking the time to be here. You speak very passionately about the attention fracking of our youth and about removing cell phones from the classroom. But in a day and age when technology is more prevalent than ever in the classroom and in schools, how do you plan on realistically enacting attacks on attention and working with media giants to do this? As well as how will you enact this without preventing students from staying ahead of the curve when it comes to using and understanding AI?
Great question.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for being here. 10 days ago, we saw the release of declassified documents that irrefutably proved that Obama and senior members of his administration and intelligence under his direction intentionally lied to the American people and derailed Trump's entire first term because the American people were propagandized and told to believe that Trump was only elected due to interference by Russia. We now have irrefutable proof that that was a lie. Based on reactions, I'm guessing many of the people in this room still remain clueless because most of the democratically controlled media works overtime to keep people ignorant. Have you looked at the declassified documents? And what is your position about accountability for the crimes that were committed?
Well, it may not seem this way, but actually the two questions have an intersection here, which is that regardless sort of what you might believe about the intentionality behind Russian interference in the 2016 election, one thing we know for certain, and let's stay in 2025, is that there is massive attempts, and it's no longer just algorithmic, there's actually now massive bot farms in Southeast Asia mostly, that are manipulating public opinion on all these social media platforms, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snap, etc. And 170 million Americans, for example, get most of their, or a lot of their media and information on TikTok. TikTok is owned and controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And
100%.
I don't think it's a Republican or Democratic issue, and in fact it wasn't when we voted on this last Congress, to say that's not acceptable. To have TikTok, to have the most influential media outlet in the world or in this country be owned by our pacing adversary is just a bad idea. And it should be owned and controlled by an American company subject to American laws.
True.
But then that leads to an awkward fact, which is we don't have a lot of American laws about these social media companies. In fact, in the 1990s, at the birth of the internet, Congress passed Section 230, which basically said that the social media corporations couldn't be sued for anything that happened on their platforms, basically immunized them against litigation. That was a really bad idea. Just to give you a sense of what a bad idea it was, there's only two other industries that have that kind of immunity. The gun industry, who can't be sued by grieving parents in court since 2005, and the pharmacy benefit managers, who can't be sued for their rebate,
Or vaccine industries.
their middlemen tactics as health insurance affiliates. So industries that go to Congress and ask not to be sued are kind of telling on themselves, because the question that Congress
True.
should be asking is, well, what are you doing that people keep on suing you for? Maybe knock that off, as opposed to us giving you blanket immunity. And so part of what we have to do for attention fracking is we got to revoke Section 230. It needs to be Facebook's problem. It needs to be TikTok's problem for people that are platforming non-consensual intimate privacy violations, right? 99% of deepfake videos online basically are non-consensual pornography of women. That's unacceptable, and they need to be liable for it. They need to be liable for defamation, for cyber harassment, for all these things that are torts in real life, but they just don't care about. We also need to raise the age of internet adulthood. Right now it's 13 and it's not enforceable. Can't enforce it. So basically, an 8-year-old can, and oftentimes does in this country, sign terms and conditions with these trillion-dollar corporations. That is inherently not a fair contract. There's no way that that contract is being signed with informed consent. And so we've got to raise the age of internet adulthood to at least 16 years old. And then finally, yeah, we should tax their revenue. They play all these shell games, they avoid all the taxation, and they've made trillions of dollars basically by monetizing your children's attention span and selling off their attention to the highest digital advertising bidder. And that money needs to go back into the American public. It needs to go into education and healthcare and things that actually help kids as opposed to turn them into products. None of that should or would inhibit freedom of information or the First Amendment or young people's access to technology. I'm not a Luddite. We're not going back to the 1950s, right? Smartphones are here. Kids are going to use technology. There's beneficial uses of technology. I was just in Fall River in my district watching kids get one-on-one tutoring on Zoom in school with high-speed internet. That's amazing. They gained 6 months in literacy instruction with 15 minutes a day of one-on-one tutoring online. Awesome. We should do more of that. But it needs to be done through the mediation and through the tutelage of teachers and parents, not through Zuckerberg and TikTok.
So did you look at the declassified documents, and what do you think about the crimes that were committed?
Okay, thank you, Congressman. Thank you for those questions.
That's a simple yes or no question.
These
Have you
are
seen the
gonna-
declassified documents? No, so you're burying your head in the sand about it.
These are going to be our final two questions that the Congressman will answer. And then I want to just on behalf of the Congressman's staff, we want to thank you for all coming here this evening. The Congressman will share some closing remarks. And then please know that our website and our offices are open for any unanswered questions, any information that you want to share with us. If you want to have conversations with us, we on the staff level will stay this evening, for a reasonable time. We're not going to stay here all night, but we'll hang around for a while. And Katerina will be putting up our website and our phone number on the screen, so you can take that down. And with that, we will have our final two questions, sir, and then you can go.
Hi. The U.S. military fed the people they found starving in the concentration camps. You, as an ex-military person, would you personally feed people that are starving? And do you believe that starvation is justifiable?
Good evening. I'm a constituent living in West Newton. My name's Amy Allen. Every other day, we seem to hear terrifying stories about individuals being detained, kidnapped, or disappeared by ICE. Most recently, there was a naturalized citizen detained by Border Patrol. He works as a school superintendent in Vermont. What can you and your colleagues on Capitol Hill do to ensure that ICE and Border Patrol do not go unchecked and that due process is extended to every person within our borders?
No, starvation is not acceptable and never acceptable. Regarding ICE, this is going to be the civil rights issue of the next year because, as I said earlier, the One Big Beautiful Bill gives ICE $75 billion. And I candidly don't actually really know how they're going to spend that much money. I mean, it's an astounding amount of money that they're, imagine if they gave that to the NIH, right? What we could do for curing Alzheimer's and cancer. The Republicans in Congress have proven 100% unwilling in any instance whatsoever to do any oversight whatsoever of ICE and immigration enforcement. This has been of all issues, unlike healthcare, where there's been a little bit sometimes of bipartisan oversight, or on national security, where sometimes Pete Hegseth has come under a little scrutiny. On immigration, it is absolute lockstep. And the reason I say that is because on this issue, more than any other, is where public pressure really does matter. So we saw when the president deployed Marines and National Guard to Los Angeles to crack down on immigration protests, there was the resulting No King's Day demonstrations. And those No King's Day demonstrations really mattered. They really did. They mobilized probably 1.5 to 2% of the population, which is a significant amount. And we know from looking at the authoritarian playbooks in Europe and South America that popular mobilization, it doesn't have to be 100% all the time, but on specific instances, paired with pushback from civil society, paired with pushback from the judiciary, paired with independent media reporting on the facts, it does matter, it does help. And we have seen that in instances where they have violated due process for immigrants and those cases gain a high profile, they backtrack. We saw that with Ms. Ozturk, the PhD candidate in Somerville. We've seen that with my constituent, Marcelo Gomes da Silva, who was 18-year-old held in Burlington facility for 6 days. So here, when we know Congress is not going to, we know Republicans in Congress aren't going to do anything, is where public, but we know the courts have actually had a pretty good track record so far of upholding due process for immigrants, where we need public pressure to support judges and the judiciary. I am trying to skate to where the puck is headed on this issue, which is I've co-led with about 20 other members, Republicans and Democrats, bipartisan immigration reform. It would put much tougher guardrails on ICE, including masking and their behavior, and much more accountability. It would have a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented immigrants here in the United States, provided they pay taxes and a fine, and it would do border security measures. It's got something for everybody. It is a reasonable piece of legislation, and it's the kind of legislation that we could work on if Democrats had the House. It's the kind of legislation that will never see the light of day for so long as Speaker Johnson is in charge, because, as President Trump made very clear when he was running against Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, he does not want to govern on immigration. He wants immigration as a political tool. Every time there's a bad news cycle, he always finds a way to make it about immigration, and he wants to continue to do that. And so our approach has to be to govern on it. And that can only happen through Congress, and it can only happen through a Democratic majority. Okay, everybody, I appreciate you staying with us for a lively back and forth for these last 90 minutes, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the summer.
Thank you all for coming this evening. One thing that I forgot to mention is as you're heading out this evening, we have little feedback forms in case you had a question that wasn't answered. You can fill it out right here, and we'll get back to you on the staff level in the days ahead. Thank you for coming, and I'll be here, and our staff will be out there. Looking forward to speaking at the end of this event. Thanks.